Hi, folks. I know I've been here before. I know I've covered the subject before, and it may seem repetitive, but every time I think, well, this is going to be the last video. It's going to kind of round up. It's dust is going to settle. Um, the groups I'm talking about just persist. They just keep going. They keep aggravating. They keep agitating. So as long as it happens, it's going to be a relevant topic to talk about. And despite what they think, this isn't a case of, well, we're talking about the issues because they say that we're being effective because people are talking about it. But this is complete delusion because what people are talking about is their antics, not their cause. I would say of all the coverage of this, perhaps I would roughly estimate 80% is about the tactics and about 20% about the cause, about climate change and about fuel poverty and so on. The majority of the discussion really has been about their tactics. So, Just Stop Oil once again have taken central London and caused gridlock on roads. This isn't M25, this is now in central London. And fed up members of the public have basically taken matters into their own hands and dragged them off. I saw one interesting picture which showed two older men, a member of the public and one of these activists. I'm guessing they were in their 60s. But it just shows this is somewhat different from other radicals, other extremists, because with Islamists and far right types, tends to be composed of primarily young men, sometimes women, sometimes older people, but primarily young men. Now, with eco extremists, I'll give them that. They've quite a wide demographic. They range from men and women, young and old. They're quite a wide demographic. But that to me doesn't show something positive. It shows that they're actually proselytizing on a wider scale. And it shows that this proselytizing is having an effect. And what I mean by that is they're a doomsday cult. And when I say they, I'm talking about Just Stop Oil, but I'm talking about Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion. They are all interlinked. You can be absolutely sure that the people at Extinction Rebellion will know the people in Just Stop Oil and Animal Rebellion and the rest of them. Um, they're all interlinked. They've all branched off from one another. Some of them are a bit more specific to oil or to private planes or whatever it is, but they're all interlinked. And there are a few key figures in this movement. Roger Hallam is one of them. I really, really regret I had an opportunity to confront him and I missed it. I've mentioned this before. He was speaking in my city, and it was a free event. I could have shown up and challenged him, and I didn't, and I regret that. I wish I had. On the other hand, I don't know if I would have kept my cool because if you lose your rag, unfortunately, it loses the message. So maybe it's a good thing I didn't see him. 'Cause I would have been thinking about at that time. It was there was a story about, I've quoted this before, the woman who suffered a stroke. Her son was trying to get her to hospital. This was an elderly woman, and she suffered a stroke as they were waiting, literally as they were waiting in the car. Now, I had that in my mind, and I think I would have been thinking about that, and I just would have really got quite angry and probably just ranted. Um, when I'm angry, I'm not always the most coherent I can be, so probably it's a good thing that that didn't happen. But there's a lot of issues going on here, and I've covered them all before. But now there's a new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, and I mentioned he's got a lot of stuff on his hands. He's got the Prescaba death to handle. I'll give him his due. He's just presided over the biggest security event in London's history in the state funeral of the Queen. So credit where credit is due. That went off very well. Huge credit to everyone involved in that because it really did, considering the scale of the event. I think there has to be credit there. But In terms of how these eco protests have been handled generally, I think it's been pretty bad. Unfortunately, from the start, and it isn't just the Metropolitan Police, British Transport Police have been involved as well, and I think some of the home counties police. Um, from the start, their approach was softly, softly, particularly with the Insulate Britain protests. Literally, their attitude was to offer them cups of tea. Now, in my opinion, the superintendent, the officer in charge of that, should have been given a dressing down by her superior. I just think it's staggering that you have a situation where criminals, because they're engaging in a criminal act, are holding the public hostage. The public have to put up with it. And the police, who are supposedly meant to be, enforcing the law, are pandering to these people, asking them if they can, well, just let us know if we can get anything you need. It's infuriating. It really is. And I don't blame motorists for being irate about that. I mean, I think that it does come into an officer class of the police where you have left wing directives going on. I do think there's an aspect of that because we've seen it with woke ideology. We've seen it with officers turning up to households to literally police people over non-crime, so-called hate incidents because they've used the wrong pronoun online. So I do think there are legitimate questions about the direction that some forces are going in. Um, so yes, it comes down to that officer class, but I don't think individual officers are wholly blameless because, um, they're the ones holding the public back, and basically they're doing it. They are, offering them cups of tea and so on. I know that they have to follow orders, but I think that I think there's just a totally wrong direction here. Um, I mean, it's crazy that there is a situation now with policing that they can't even show up to burglaries. This is one of Rowley's biggest priorities. He actually said that he's frustrated by the situation, and he admitted it's wrong for officers to be doing this. But he claimed that their disruption so far doesn't constitute significant disruption. Yet he says he's frustrated by the situation. But what on earth would constitute serious disruption? I feel the way about the police at the moment as I do about judges, where they sort of blame the government. They sort of say, oh, we can only follow the legislation. I don't entirely buy that because the policing and crime bill clearly stated that acts that are intended to disrupt the public, will be covered in that bill. So the police have the tools there. So why are they not being more robust? I really think at this point there's no excuse. And they turn up late. The reason the public are taking matters into their own hand is because the police take an hour, 2 hours to even show up. What sort of reassurance is this going to give people? So you have a situation where the public are having to put up with them. But I do think they're extremists because I mean think of the way they're going about things. Not only are they engaging in acts that have totally utterly failed, they haven't changed a single thing that they supposedly want, but they have this misanthropic contempt for society. And that's why I connect them to the kind of millennialist cults that emerged from the Great Plague of London and other historic events. They have a contempt for society. Some of them hold up little pictures saying, "This is for my son, this is for my grandchild." But they have total disregard for other people's grandchildren and children because they don't care about, for example, stopping parents getting their sick children to hospital. And that isn't hyperbole, that's not made up. There are there's empirical evidence that stuff has happened. There has been videos showing tearful relatives pleading with them to move. In one of their latest stunts, they vandalized a Van Gogh painting. Now, that might have been a copy, but that's not the point. The frame's going to be original, and they won't necessarily know what to copy. So they're engaging in cultural vandalism, a bit like the Red Guards in 1960s China. They're hooligans. And you get drunks and louts in this country who will maybe They'll be high or they'll be drunk and they'll engage in antisocial behavior. They'll vandalize a telephone box, they'll annoy their neighbors and so on. Well, harass their neighbors and so on. It can destroy lives. Antisocial behavior is not a trivial thing, despite what police forces designate it as. But really, I don't see much difference with these eco zealots because they're hiding behind their cause, but really, ultimately, they're just criminals. I think we should stop calling them protesters because they are engaging in criminal acts. It just, but I've mentioned they're misanthropic. I've mentioned that they have this failure to introspect. But what concerns me is their dogma, the fact that they are literally telling young people that billions of people are going to die in a few years. Now we'll very soon hit 8 billion people in the world. Um, I think overpopulation is a major issue. And I do think that the world faces increasing problems with climate change. I'm not in denial about that. But I do also believe that these green groups are guilty of extreme alarmism and scaremongering. Billions of people are not going to die in a few years. Um, we have seen arguably more storms, stronger storms, but you could look at natural disasters from 30 years ago. You look at natural disasters in the 1970s. To give some examples, the year 1970 saw the Ebola cyclone in Bangladesh that killed about 500,000 people. 1975, Cyclone Nina in Typhoon Nina, excuse me, in China killed about 250,000 people. So the 1970s, as an example, had some major, major natural disasters that were actually far deadlier than anything we've seen in the last 2 years. Um, but it may be that the frequency of storms is increasing. So there are a lot of issues going on, but these tactics will not save a single villager in Pakistan or a single farmer in Ethiopia. It won't save a single pensioner in the UK either. They are exhibitionists. They say that they're doing it for their children, but they have a selfish contempt for the rest of us. They say we have no choice because the government won't listen, yet they will not listen to the public. They're extremists. And my concern about these groups, I would compare them to Islamists and far right types because they're proselytizing and radicalizing young minds in a similar way. And just because they have not used violence yet does not mean that they're peaceful. This absence of violence does not equate to peace. Deliberately seeking to hurt the public, deliberately seeking to cause immense stress to the public, by their own admission, they want to target the public. It's not a peaceful act. That is a confrontational act. That's a hostile act. It's not peaceful. Just because they're not throwing petrol bombs doesn't mean that they're peaceful. But I don't think they're above it, actually. I think it's only a matter of time before they resort to sabotage. I mean, look at what's happened. Extinction Rebellion started off with vandalism and sit-ins in central London, which was disruptive. But then you got insulated Britain, which was worse because they actually were endangering lives by walking onto the motorway. Now, just stop oil. I don't know what direction they will go in. They're also using vandalism and sit-ins, but I honestly think at some point one of these groups is really going to seriously consider sabotage. They're going to think, well, these tactics aren't working. Let's blow up a bridge. Let's blow up an oil depot. In the Republic of Ireland, there was that tragedy in County Donegal. It was an accident, the gas explosion, but 10 people died. Now, what is to stop Just Stop Oil, for example, sabotaging a petrol station because it uses fossil fuels? And then you'll have fatalities. Then it will no longer be a debate over whether they're terrorists. They will be terrorists. I personally think that they have already crossed a threshold as per the 2000 definition, the 2000 Terrorism Act. Dan Wootton pointed this out on GB News, and whether you like Dan Wootton or not, what he said wasn't off the mark in terms of the fact that they were holding the government to ransom to push a political agenda. Now, that is the definition of terrorism under that act, whether you agree with it or not. But every time I think that they're going to finally, introspect and realize that this is failing, they don't. They just continue. So I really don't know where this is going. I mean, I don't drive, so they don't personally affect me. Yeah, I should be clear about that. But I have huge sympathy for commuters, and I have huge sympathy for Londoners who have to put up with them. But I think Riley needs to, stop sort of beating around the bush with this. He needs to sense the public mood. The public want to see action. It's all very well saying, oh, well, they don't quite fit the definition yet. The government wants it, the public want it. So, Mr. Riley, just do something. Get your officers to drag these people off the roads. I mean, everywhere else in the world that this would not be tolerated. Even liberal Sweden, as far as I understand, takes a more hardline approach to this kind of so-called protest. But what really galls me is when they're legitimized as protesters, because anyone who feels angry about anything could engage in criminal acts and say, "Oh, I'm just protesting," and that's a recipe for anarchy. So they need to stop being justified and excused. They're extremists. They're obnoxious extremists who have a contempt for the wider public. They're not interested in reason. They're not interested in sort of listening to people halfway. So, anyone who thinks, oh, but they make a good point and maybe they have no choice and we could just talk to them about it. I saw one idiot write into the Metro newspaper saying those angry motorists, instead of getting angry, they should sit down and join them. As if people could just give up their schedule. They don't know what those motorists are doing. They might well be delivering essential services. They may well be going to a hospital. They may well be going to see relatives for important life events, a wedding, a baptism, a funeral. There's a million different scenarios that these people could be impacting. They make me sick, quite honestly, and I just think that as a country, we need to take a much harder line with them. I don't think the police can keep making excuses and claiming their hands are tied. They have the power to do something now with the policing bill. It's about time they did.